This week, we read a new piece from Darren A. Laners, which is a response to the article that I wrote last week and read for you all. And it starts off, Freemasonry has a membership problem, which has caused a leadership problem. You might want to write this down. Freemasonry has a membership problem, which has caused a leadership problem. We'll read through that piece and discuss various portions of it, and then we'll follow up with a great article coming from MasonicWorld.com called Truly Prepared, stemming from 98 years ago. How did the craft view its health and its membership, and what were they looking forward to? This was after World War I, but before World War II. This piece makes it clear that perhaps we've never had our ducks in a row. All this and more. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
I'd like to thank our contributors, fellows, producers, and legacy partners for assisting us with the production of this podcast. We can't do it without you, and we thank each and every one of you for all of your efforts and your commitments to Masonic education. That said, I do have to say that if you are somebody who is recently signed up for one of those levels or has made a contribution to the podcast, please be patient. I am currently getting through a backlog of emails due to the holiday season, and I will be sending out cards and pins and everything else very shortly, so I wanted to just address that very quickly. In the news, well, this upcoming week in Texas Masonry should be interesting. If you've been following along in the Texas Facebook group at all, it's been wild and crazy. I don't know too much about the inside scoop, as it were. All I know is probably what you all know that have been reading those posts on Texas Freemasonry. So, hoping for brotherhood to prevail in anything that happens in the Grand Lodge of Texas. In other news, I've also added several new presentation dates that will be coming up this year. I'll be in Virginia quite a bit. Definitely going to be attending Esotericon in Virginia. If you want more details on that, please check out esotericon.net. Brothers John, Jason, Joe, and Kevin have been working hard behind the scenes to make everything happen. We're getting very excited for announcements regarding that, or at least I am. I'll be in Virginia also later on this year for a presentation, and also Masonic Week is coming up just next month, so should be pretty interesting as we get closer to that. All right, all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the education this week. You know, I opened the door last week when I read an article that I posted on the Midnight Freemasons about Freemasonry and leadership. And this had caused a number of brothers to mostly agree with what I had to say, and some wanted to expound on those things and have done so in follow-ups to my article. One such article was published just this last Wednesday, and in an effort to keep everybody on the level and well-informed, we're going to read this latest response by Worshipful Brother Darren A. Laners, who is, of course, our Midnight Freemason contributor, as well as our wonderful managing editor. Let's just get into it then. Freemasonry has a membership problem, which has caused a leadership problem. By Midnight Freemason contributor and managing editor, Worshipful Brother Darren A. Laners. Now, breaking out of the article for just one moment, those of you who are listening can't see the meme content that precedes the article, which is the old meme of Willy Wonka, and it says, "Didn't read the article, you say? I'd love to hear your gratuitous diatribe." And another one of the paperclip, the infamous paperclip from the old word processing programs on Windows, and it says, "It looks like you're trying to comment without reading the article first. Would you like some help with that?" And I love it because this is a major problem. We've got a lot of brothers who just read the headline and want to comment something without actually reading what the article is all about. So do yourself a favor out there. If you're one of those brothers who found yourself guilty of this in the past, I know I have, please read the articles. Well, here we go. Emeritus contributor Robert Johnson published an article this past Wednesday on this blog, The Midnight Freemasons, called Not Leadership, which has these key takeaways from his TLDR version of the article. Point 1. Freemasonry as an organization has no stance, responsibility, or obligation to teach leadership. 2. Leadership can be learned within Freemasonry, but this is no different than how it is learned in other organizations, including real-life work experience. We are not special, which means it isn't our mission. And 3. There's nothing wrong with hosting leadership training as long as it is 1. Secondary or tertiary to the understanding, application, and continuing study of the philosophy of Freemasonry. 2. Does not demand a Grand Lodge budget line item expense that surpasses that of Masonic education. And 3. Qualified individuals who are leaders in the real world with actual credentials and have resumes that have been validated must lead these workshops or camps. RJ asked me to write a follow-up to his article, Guilty as Charged, so without further ado, I wanted to expand on some of what RJ had to say as well as how it relates to some current issues that our fraternity is facing. I believe they are interrelated as we discuss leadership. Point 1. Freemasonry has a membership problem, which has caused a leadership problem. You might want to write this down. Freemasonry has a membership problem, which has caused a leadership problem. Freemasonry has an obsession with membership numbers because we have been declining from our post-World War I and II numbers. These numbers were artificially inflated by the men who came back from those conflicts and felt that they were missing the camaraderie that many of them had become accustomed to during their combat tours. The graph below shows that we hit our high watermark of membership in 1959 when we had a total of 4.1 million members, out of approximately 53.3 million males over the age of 20, meaning that around 7.7% of the eligible male population were Freemasons. In 2022, there were 881,219 members in the U.S. according to the MSANA, out of approximately 128.4 million males over the age of 20, meaning that less than 1%, approximately 0.06%, are Freemasons. I use the age of 20 because some jurisdictions require a man to be 18 years of age while others require 21 years of age for membership, so I settled on 20 years of age as a median. The U.S. Census data usually had an age distribution in units of 5 years, so 20 years of age was also easier to use as a starting point. Even though the peak of our membership happened 65 years ago, it seems that we keep chasing this unicorn. Masonic bodies have decided that quantity of members is the measurement of the success of our organization, instead of the quality of our membership. Because of using an incorrect metric to judge the success of our organization and not upholding our standards for membership, some Masonic lodges have collectively turned the ballot box into a turnstile. In some cases, the only qualities that they look for are a heartbeat, a bank account, and the ability to say yes or no to the investigation committee. In fact, the only thing that might get a candidate blackballed from joining a lodge or Masonic body are qualities that shouldn't even be discussed in our fraternal gatherings. Things like a member's sexuality, race, religion, or political affiliation. We need to stop pretending that every man who is a Mason is good. We have some members that aren't good men. Some of these men who should never, ever have set foot into a Masonic lodge, now are appointed and elected leaders in our fraternity. In the real world, leadership problems occur when employees are promoted based on their job skills and not their leadership skills. When employees in the real world are promoted based on their job skills and they need formal ongoing training on how to be good supervisors or leaders, they usually end up as poor leaders and end up having the below leadership problems. 1. They have communication issues. 2. They are in constant conflict with other managers or employees. 3. Difficulty dealing with their employees' demands. 4. They are resistant to change. 5. Their employees have low morale. 6. They do not take responsibility for their decisions or have no initiative to make decisions. 7. Their employees have low motivation. 8. They use an outdated leadership style, usually one which is authoritarian. In theory, Freemasonry should not have any of the above leadership issues. Our leadership is elected democratically to the main leadership positions in almost every Masonic organization. At least, that's what's supposed to happen. More on that later. Reading the above leadership problems, how many of you feel that many of those could apply to at least one or more Masonic bodies you belong to? The fact that you said yes says all you need to know. Why is this? We currently have men in leadership positions in Freemasonry who have no business being in a leadership position. Freemasonry is a bureaucracy, and it requires a lot of members to serve in leadership positions to keep the Masonic machine running. Members who are appointed to leadership positions at the district and area levels are usually not appointed based on their leadership abilities, but because they are good at memorization and mimicry. Furthermore, because some of these men have waited patiently in the progressive line of whatever body, kept their mouths shut, and placated the current leadership, membership advances them election cycle after election cycle. In Freemasonry, like in business, when bad leaders are put into positions to appoint others into leadership roles, they will appoint those who also believe them to be good leaders. This leads to them surrounding themselves with sycophants that will further inflate their belief that they are entitled to their leadership roles. These men end up getting a fancy title and apron, and with it the power and influence to maintain the status quo. The law of probability means that there will be a distribution of men who are good leaders with those who are terrible ones in these positions, and varying degrees in between. While I agree that leadership training should not be Freemasonry's primary objective, I do believe that leadership development training is desperately needed in our organizations, usually at every level. I will go a step further than RJ and state that if Masonic bodies are going to do leadership development training, the training needs to be taught by an accredited organization that specializes in talent development. We can ill afford to use Masonic leaders who are not qualified or accredited to teach leadership development. Just because I have taken multiple leadership training courses, I do not consider myself qualified to instruct one. On top of this, some of the elected officers in the grand lines of Masonic organizations, and some of the members appointed to the Masonic bureaucracy are the members who need the leadership training the most. So they should not be involved in teaching something they are not good at. We also have to acknowledge that no amount of leadership development training will turn a bad leader into a good leader. We have those predisposed to the philosophy of servant leadership within our fraternity, and these are the leaders that Freemasonry needs to promote and elect. Servant leaders put the needs of their team members first and strive to create an environment where everyone can thrive. This style of leadership is particularly well suited for all volunteer organizations where the success of the organization depends on the dedication and hard work of its volunteers. The experience of leadership in any organization can help men predisposed to be good leaders become better ones. However, those who are bad at leadership will believe themselves to be great leaders. They will learn nothing from their leadership experience because they believe they have nothing left to learn. Furthermore, the progressive line often means that when we have bad leaders in our organizations, they continue to get promoted or elected because, point 2, the majority of Masonic membership is only concerned with maintaining the status quo. You might want to write this down. The majority of Masonic membership is only concerned with maintaining the status quo. Freemasonry suffers from the status quo bias. The status quo bias is a type of cognitive bias that involves the preference that things stay as they are, or that the current state of affairs remains the same. Progressive lines of leadership keep advancing. On the rare occasion where there is a competition for an office, we see the membership side with the status quo. In some cases, when it's time to elect the junior-most officers into the grand progressive lines, these lines will ask for interested men to apply. However, when it comes to the vote for the leadership of the Grand Line at the Grand Sessions, only one candidate is offered to the membership. Membership usually is not allowed to know anything about the other applicants, as the applicant put forward is the one who best fits the siloed groupthink of the other Grand Officers in that line. I envision a scene similar to what I've illustrated below from Todd Browning's Freaks. Imagine the officers of the Grand Line dancing inebriated on the table, screaming, "One of us! One of us!" While these other candidates can run from the floor at these grand sessions, they are not the candidates who have the backing of the bureaucracy of the Masonic leadership of that particular organization. The only way wholesale change can happen at a Grand Lodge level requires the membership to revolt against the status quo and put leaders into each office in that line who would be willing to make wholesale changes to their organization, and they would have to replace each cog in the Masonic bureaucracy with those who would implement their vision. Membership would also have to be willing to be courageous enough to vote for such legislation that would implement the change. Unfortunately, a majority of our members are unwilling to vote for change. This means that our leadership problems are a direct result of our membership. Regardless of what majority of the vote an election for a leadership position requires, or an amendment needs to pass, both require a majority of our members' vote. Ergo, the problematic leaders in our organizations are a direct result of the membership. The members who voted them into the fraternity, the members who cast votes for them to remain in power, or the members who appointed them to a leadership position. Let's be honest with ourselves. On the off chance that a visionary leader or leaders would be elected or appointed into these bodies, they immediately put a target on their back by those who defend the status quo if they rock the boat too much. As Freemasons, even though it might not be our jurisdiction, what is happening in Texas and DC, and apparently in upper echelons of leadership, independent bodies, should make us all embarrassed. Is this really how we want to portray ourselves to the profane world? I realize that there are two sides to every story, but from an outsider looking in, it reaffirms everything I've said so far. As an organization, Freemasonry is so beholden to our past, our history, and our sacred landmarks to the status quo that we seem incapable of thinking about the future. The landscape of decaying Masonic temples that exist in small towns across America proves me correct. In many cases, our departed brethren built magnificent structures, never thinking once that at some point, the cost to maintain the building might cause the lodge they so dearly loved to merge with another or close entirely. And yes, while I said membership numbers are not the membership of our organization's success, we still need a membership to continue to be an organization. Yet, instead of focusing on making decisions about what we want for our future, we have members and leaders who continue to kick the can down the road because our average age of membership is in its early to mid-60s. The members that are in my age demographic and younger are going to be the ones who are going to have to make the difficult decisions to close and consolidate our Masonic lodges, temples, chapters, councils, valleys, etc. in the next 10 to 20 years. Again, because the brethren who protect the status quo didn't have the forethought to start the conversations, the hard conversations, early. Hopefully, I'm wrong, and we have enough good leaders in place who have created 5-year plans and succession plans, and they have started to have these conversations. Even one of the most successful marketing campaigns that Freemasonry has ever had, the Not Just a Man marketing campaign, is 5 years old, which in marketing terms is ancient history. In my own personal opinion, the one thing that we could use to help market Freemasonry to men today is Masonic education. Why Masonic education? Masonic education is like a gym workout for your brain. RJ states that leadership training should not demand a Grand Lodge budget line item expense that surpasses that of the Masonic education. This is because, in our personal experience, Masonic education is not thought of or utilized as an asset to the fraternity or to its membership, so it is not prioritized. What men get out of Masonic education is something that a majority of other civic organizations cannot provide. Yet, many of our members and leaders eschew it. Why is this? They do not understand what Masonic education is. There seems to be a prevailing thought that Masonic education equals teaching of esoteric philosophy. Because of this, Masonic education is either thought to be of little or no value to the practical application of Freemasonry. Often, Masonic education is pushed as things that classify as Masonic instruction, leadership training, officer training, or teaching ritual and floor work. While both develop membership, there is a distinct difference between Masonic instruction and Masonic education. Point 3. Masonic education is not leadership training, officer training, or ritual floor work instruction. You might want to write this down. Masonic education is not leadership training, officer training, or ritual floor work instruction. Masonic instruction is learning the ritual, floor work, and everything else that relates to the work being performed within a tiled lodge. It is also the teaching of those skills that will help develop members' leadership and management abilities. It is part of the member development, which requires the instructor to be proficient in the skill that they are teaching, which is why you see those who have passed the Board of Grand Examiners tests instructing ritual and floor work. This is why I will reiterate the point I made above. Leadership development training needs to be taught by an accredited organization that specializes in talent development. While I have a great appreciation for our ritualists and those who do excellent floor work, I'm always amazed that some of these men have no desire to understand where the ritual or floor work came from and what it actually means. Masonic education is learning about the meanings behind the work being performed within a tiled lodge space. It is a study of the philosophies of the world, the liberal arts and sciences, Masonic ritual, the sacred volumes of law from the various world religions, Masonic history, and esoterics. It is the nurturing of the member's intellect, imagination, and spiritual growth. It is the key to understanding how to follow the instructions left on the trestle board, which guide us as we struggle to shape our rough ashlar into a perfect one in our personal quarries. It is part of member development, which can be undertaken alone, but it really should be done in a group setting, which is why it should be prioritized as part of our meeting experience. When done properly in a group setting, men will let their guard down. When this occurs, you see the actual working of brotherly love. You see men who might be polarized oppositely from each other in the profane world agree on something. Every member has a voice during Masonic education. Because of this, it allows the exchange of differing ideas and concepts to flow freely. It is through Masonic education that our membership develops their ability to think independently and philosophically, and take the lessons taught by our kindred science and apply them in the profane world. This being said, maybe we should not be surprised when some of our grand lines promote Masonic instruction as Masonic education. An educated membership is a membership that will ask questions, study the Constitution and bylaws of that particular body, and demand change. It is much easier to instruct the membership how to memorize our rituals and mimic floor movements, what duties they should perform in each chair in the lodge room, and how they should manage the lodge when they become a presiding officer. It is easier to have a membership full of parrot masons squawking in unison, one of us, than to have a membership that asks questions and demands accountability and transparency of its leadership. Our leadership problems have been caused by membership, and they can only be fixed by membership. Each of us must begin to be courageous at our local lodges and tell our brethren who want to give signed petitions out like candy on Halloween that you will blackball any candidate they bring on the floor for a vote if they do not make a concerted effort to get to know that man for months before offering them membership. We must identify and vote alternative candidates into power in cases where the leadership of that organization is not doing its job. We must bring up legislation at our grand sessions that will move Freemasonry forward into the future, and if it does not pass, we must continue to bring it up until it does, no matter how long it takes. Change in Freemasonry doesn't happen overnight. It happens very slowly, but we'll get there eventually. It's just a matter of time. We must have the patience and stay the course. Darren A. Laners. So I'll provide a link back to this particular piece, and of course in it he has 3 or 4 citations that you can follow links to back to some of what he's talking about in certain areas. I find this piece to be an absolute expansion of what I also think. I think Darren has unpacked this even more than I had. I think the most controversial part in here sounds very interesting, right? I'm sure some ears stood up when I read the line where he says, "Each of us must begin to be courageous at our local lodges and tell our brethren who want to give a signed petition out, like candy on Halloween, that you'll blackball any candidate they bring to the floor for a vote if they don't make a concerted effort to get to know the man for months before them offering the vote for the membership." So that's controversial for a number of reasons, but the chief one is that we're really not supposed to say how we vote. In fact, it could be considered a Masonic offense. However, the caveat here is not so much that he's telling you how he voted, it's more of a demand that if we don't perform due diligence, you will and are not afraid of exercising your right as a Master Mason in that lodge. So under that context, makes much more sense. And while certainly there's nothing there that can be considered unmasonic, rather considered very Masonic, when he says that we must bring up legislation at our Grand Lodge sessions year after year until it passes. Yep, we're king of that. Have we ever seen any of them pass? No. Has jurisprudence recommended that they pass? Yes. So that has been quite interesting. In any case, the brothers of the Grand Jurisdiction of Illinois can look forward to additional bylaw and constitution amendment changes coming in October of 2024. Let me know your thoughts in the Craftsman Plus group. I'd love to know what you think about some of this conversation happening. Next up, I want to read a piece that is old, 98 years old. It comes from MasonicWorld.com. The title is Truly Prepared. It is by Unknown, written in 1926. Now, if you go to MasonicWorld.com, you'll notice something. They have had a little bit of a facelift. It's a very nice website. It always has been somewhat simple, but they have continued that simple, nice look and really streamlined it. I think it looks wonderful. So hats off to whoever owns it. It shows copyright Barsis LLC. So I don't know who that is, but hats off to you. Thanks for keeping MasonicWorld.com alive. It is absolutely a wonderful site and a wonderful resource to Masons worldwide. So, Truly Prepared from MasonicWorld.com. Original published date 1926 by Unknown. Here we go. Why do so many Masons lose interest in Masonry and drift away from the lodge? Why do the majority retain only a nominal relation to the craft? Why is it that hardly 10% ever attend any meeting of the lodge, and a still smaller number take an active part in its affairs? What is the meaning of these facts, and how can the problem which they raise be solved? Such questions are much in the minds of the leadership of the craft everywhere. It is a condition and not a theory that confronts us. The influx of members during the Great War and in the years following it has subsided. In some states, the number of initiates has fallen below pre-war days. The vast mass of those who came in on the impulse of wartime are now numbered among the casual Masons. The feeling grows that something is wrong, and that we must seek to set it right, if we are to have an alert and active Masonry. Just now, the Masonic Service Association is working on this problem with the leaders of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, and we beg to give here the findings arrived at, both as to the meaning of the fact and the method of dealing with it. Clearly, we have failed, quote-unquote, to set the craft to work and give them proper instruction, or else they would not drop out of our membership, or regard Masonry as merely another order to belong to and nothing more. To that end, we must begin at the beginning and lay the basis of a real Masonic life. What is needed is extra ritualistic preparation of the man applying for the degrees before, during, and after his reception into the lodge. Of the three, the first, if not the most vital, is surely profoundly important, and it has been almost entirely neglected. Let any man recall, if he can, his state of mind regarding the craft when he knocked at its door, and he will realize that he had but the faintest idea of what Masonry is and of what it meant to be initiated into it. The method now proposed takes account of the fact, and takes him in hand as soon as he has expressed a desire to join the lodge, and even before he has made his application for degrees. In this way, by making strict inquiry of an aspirant for the degrees to see if he has in himself the stuff of which a Mason may be made, no end of embarrassment may be avoided, and the craft strengthened or protected accordingly. The first duty of the committee, as well as the last, is to see whether or not the man before them has the qualities of character which will enable him to add to the good name and integrity of the craft, and also whether he will actually make such contribution. In short, is he in his daily life and acts going to be a Mason, in fact, or in name only? Such information or impression can be obtained by examining him as to his attitude towards Masonry. Why is he applying? What induced him to take this step? What is his opinion of Masonry, and upon what does his opinion rest? It should be emphasized in plain terms that his privilege of membership in the craft carries with it certain obligations that will rest upon him toward the craft. It must be explained to the applicant that it is the business of Masonry to teach the virtues of the moral life, and his known attitude in regard to these matters ought to determine whether he is a man fit for the fellowship of the fraternity. Also, care must be taken to impress upon the applicant the fact that the moral life obtains its sanction and authority from spiritual faith. He ought to be asked, not obtrusively but candidly and earnestly, his ideas regarding God. If he has not clearly confronted his mind with the supreme reality, he ought to be asked to do so. No man who is uncertain about God, or who treats the idea of God as a piece of lodge furniture, has any place in a Masonic lodge. It is important that an applicant should know what duties devolve upon him as a member of the lodge, such as acquaintance with the ritual and other items of Masonic information, attendance upon the lodge as a duty, and whether or not he is in a position to attend, whether he is willing to assist in the work of the lodge by serving on committees or otherwise. As to his financial obligation, can he afford what it will be necessary for him to spend? When his petition has been voted upon, along with his notice of election, the applicant ought to receive a copy of the pamphlet entitled Preparation, with the request that he read it carefully. After he has received the entered apprentice degree, he should be given bird's eye view of Masonry, so to put it, showing geographical distribution and grand lodges, both at home and abroad. He will realize that Masonry encircles the earth, but is strongest in America, where 3/4 of the craft live and toil. He ought to be told of the leading men in the state and the nation who are and have been Masons, if only to let see what kind of quality of men these craft attract and develop. It is not an accident that Masonry lures strong men and makes them stronger. Its teachings are the basic principles of civilized society, the very groundwork of church, state, and home. Every man needs to realize that the truths of Masonry are not secret, but only the method and symbols by which they are taught. The parts of our ceremonies which are secret ought to be pointed out, and the candidate cautioned about disclosing what he has received. Those who quote-unquote post the candidate on the work of the degree ought to tell him something of what it means, after the manner of the intenders in the old lodges of Scotland. Such a book as The Symbolism of the 3 Degrees by Street is useful for this purpose. Not that it should be read to the candidate, but its facts told him as he goes. He should know the use of the tools of the craft, the meaning of the great lights, especially the great lights. Its teaching about brotherly love, relief, and faith is cardinal virtues of temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice. As in the Scottish lodges, the obligation should be explained, particularly the figurative character of its penalty, and the fashion in which the oath was sealed and why. He ought to know the due guard and sign of the degree and when and how they are to be used in the lodge. It's not enough to tell him these facts. He ought to be fully clothed and asked to enter and retire from the lodge in proper manner. A candidate is in novel surroundings, and while he does not remember all that is told him, it is not easy for him to forget what he acts out. In a like manner, the second degree is to be studied, showing in what ways it differs from the first, in the greater inclusiveness of the obligation as well as in its emphasis upon the arts and sciences, with particular reference to geometry and its meaning and use by the craft. The initiate is asked to read the Masonic Service Association Bulletin 357 before taking the third degree. It is a pity that neither the ritual nor the lecture tell us the meaning of the great degree, which has in it the sublime secret of Masonry and of life itself. All efforts must be made to get the initiate to grasp the truth with which it deals, the truth of the eternal life. Having received the degrees of Masonry, an initiate needs to know something of the regulations of the craft, its constitution, its landmarks, and the nature and authority of the Grand Lodge under whose obedience it lives. It's only fair to tell him the relation of the Blue Lodge to other Masonic bodies, both York and Scottish rites, and in a way to emphasize the supremacy of craft Masonry. It will be useful for him to know that the Shrine, the Grotto, and other such organizations, while made up of Masons, are not Masonic any more than any club made up of Masons is Masonic. More important still is the etiquette of the craft in the lodges and outside, and the discretion necessary in making himself known as a Mason, or in responding to the advances of others. Such simple things about Masonry, and how to use it, ought to be taught to every Mason in the lodge, and such extra ritualistic instruction of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts proposes to give the men who enter its fellowship, using the literature and other helps prepared by the Masonic Services Association. It is hoped that other Grand Lodges will take up the plan, or some other equally good and simple fairness to men who are made Masons, that they may be duly and truly prepared and be the better appreciative and service to the craft. Some of us, looking back, wish very much that we had been thus set to work and taught the meaning and uses of our tools. The adoption of such a plan by an old and great Grand Lodge marks a long step in the right direction, a new epoch in Masonic education of which we have heard so much and seen so little result. It is like a dream come true, the full meaning of which we can realize save those who have worked and planned for years to see it become a fact. Such things we can do together, each borrowing from the wisdom of others, those of us who have had to wait and work hard for information about Masonry which should have been taught to us by our Mother Lodge, look with envy upon the young men of the old Bay State. Well, there you have this awesome piece, truly prepared, which I have some inkling that this was either associated with or perhaps was a Short Talk Bulletin. It certainly reads like it was one. It was not my intent to step on the Short Talk Bulletin podcast. I think they do an absolutely wonderful job, and I did check to see if they had read this one before, which they had not, so is the only reason I went ahead with it, even though I wasn't sure if it was a Short Talk Bulletin or not. That said, I really enjoyed this piece. I think that there is somewhat of a interesting choice of words that comes up, in terms of religious fervor. I think that just reflects the time in which it was written, 1926. But some other things that really stand out is the fact that these guys haven't quite hit that World War II high yet in terms of membership, and yet they're already kind of complaining about the Masonic membership and the boom they had in World War I. So they experienced this, it dwindled, and then it happened again, and oh my gosh, this was really cool, and then it just dropped off again. It's quite interesting. The other thing that I find to be of note in this particular article is that they give a pretty solid plan of action as to bringing a man into the fraternity and preparing him for the degrees. The one thing that I find sort of troublesome is that Masonic education, while mentioned, doesn't really offer any clues to what in fact that would mean. And through much of this, they are asking you to prepare the candidate in ways that markedly put that person in camps of administrative leadership, where they are told to mimic and learn the degrees, and to make a good Mason, they must be active on those fronts. Certainly, I think that's probably not a true statement. I don't think that only active Masons are good Masons. There are plenty of guys who show up each week that are not great dudes. But we hope, and we keep them in our thoughts, that they will become greater and better men. That's why we're there. And with all of these things, it's very interesting to see the call for Masonic education as it was this thing that was constantly chased after for years and years and years, that it's mentioned in this quasi-Grand Lodge sanctioned thing, the Masonic, if this is a short talk bulletin. While they mention the words Masonic education, they still give nothing as to what that means. They really dance around all of it and focus still on the practical, which is a shame. So there you have it. If you'd like to get a copy of this particular piece, I'll post a PDF in the show notes or as a bonus in the app, and you guys can just download it. Once again, I want to thank all of those who have been our contributors, fellows, producers, and legacy partners. You guys are amazing and make this show happen. Thanks again to all of you. And if you're out there thinking, hey, how can I assist the WCY podcast in bringing Masonic education to all those interested in the craft? Well, head on over to our website at wcypodcast.com, click on support the show, and check out your various options. Now, something else that I had mentioned previously, of course, was the Lyceum. New issues are coming of the Lyceum. You can go to wcypodcast.com/the-Lyceum, Lyceum, and hit enter, and you'll go to the website there. You can read all past issues as well as read about the Lyceum and all of that. You can check out the website to the Masonic Education Alliance at MasonicEducationAlliance.com. I'd like to thank our board at Masonic Education Alliance. That is Darren A. Laners, Joe Martinez, and Robert Staffieri. And of course, I serve on the board as well, but these three brothers are making it happen, and I really appreciate all of their help. So thanks again to everybody out there supporting all of these awesome educational programs and, offering tools to make good men better. Until next week, stand the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson. Take care.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.
Media.
This is